this figure, I created it to describe from a New Zealand perspective the hierarchy of the data flows from the targeters to the targeted. But this will easily translate to any of the NSA partner agencies. So at the very top of the screen, we have the global network. The global network is what the NSA calls their intelligence empire. They refer to it as their global network. The top tier of that empire is USA and marked no foreign nationals, no foreign, which in theory means that only the USA has top level access to that data. Now, the USA also has network access to the networks, including the hardware of all of their so-called partner agencies. And they group those partner agencies, the partner agencies being the international spy agencies of the countries around the world who they partner with and who they have these data sharing agreements with. So they partner them in little groups. So that's where the Two Eyes comes in, which is there's actually two groups of Two Eyes. There's the US-UK, which is the original intelligence sharing agreement from the 40s. And then there's also the US-Israel Two Eyes. So Israel is getting higher level access to US intelligence data than any of the other English-speaking countries. Then there's the 5 eyes, 7 eyes, through to 14 eyes, 41 eyes. We talked about that in detail last week, so I'm not going to go through it again. Now, with each of these partner agencies, they have a military partnership agreement because fundamentally it is the military that is underpinning all of this. And this is one of the key things to understand is that in the Western world, it is not politicians. It is not parliaments. It is not government that is running the show. It is the military. This is a transnational military dictatorship. The United States is run by the military, not by the president, not by the White House, not by the Congress, not by the Senate. In New Zealand is run by the military. It is not run by the Prime Minister. It is not run by the people you see on TV. It's run by the people you don't see on TV. So this military partnership agreement is what enables the data sharing. And each country has a military partnership with in our case, the Five Eyes, but ultimately with the US and the global network. So in New Zealand, we have two major spy agencies. We have the New Zealand Security Intelligence Services, which is our domestic spy agency. This is basically the equivalent of the FBI. Then we have the Government Communications Security Bureau, which is our international spy agency. And they are roughly the NSA. It's basically New Zealand's NSA. So from the global network, the data is passed through the Five Eyes, which comes from the country that has a military partnership agreement, which then is pulling data from the domestic and the international spy agencies of that country. Then, on the next tier, we have something called fusion centers. Fusion centers I've done a lot of writing about in my journalism. If you look at Suzie3D and type fusion center on Twitter, you'll find even more information. Fusion centers are a creation of war. The first fusion centers were in Iraq and in Afghanistan and in wherever US was waging war. Fusion centers fuse data from a variety of data sources. They merge all of that data together and then they feed that data to their customers. Now, fusion centers don't just use military intelligence data. They also use open source data, but they also use corporate data, private data, and they pull all the data from all these different systems together and then feed them back. Now, these fusion centers have been established post 9/11 by counterterrorism legislation. So almost everything we're going to discuss tonight comes under the so-called umbrella of counterterrorism. But they expand that definition of counterterrorism to mean any threat to national security. And then they expand what a threat to national security is by removing or diluting or changing the definition to what a threat to national security is, as we've seen in the legislation, as we discussed last week. They've been deliberately broadening the scope of what it means to be a threat to national security. But also because in the counterterrorism post 9/11 legislation, they deemed critical infrastructure to be a part of the state, and then they decided that private corporations were critical infrastructure. So all of a sudden, banks and transport companies and credit card companies and these types of things, telecoms companies, have been brought under the umbrella of the state, which means that to be a threat to the state, you just have to be a threat to its critical infrastructure. So if you're a threat to a bank, or you're, for example, an anti-TPP activist, then next thing you know, you're literally branded a threat to national security, and all of this military counter-terror apparatus is used to target you. So the fusion centres are pulling information from government departments and from domestic police intelligence units and from corporate entities. And they are merging that and they're feeding it up to the nation states' domestic and international spy agencies, which is then pushing it to Five Eye, which is then pushing it to the global network. So they're also passing information down. So these arrows are data flows, right? So what I'm showing here is that data comes down into the fusion center, but it also goes up. So it goes up to the global network and down from the global network. So as I just discussed, the corporate entities are deemed part of the critical infrastructure, which is how they're brought into this big data scam. And the government departments have been justifying the spying on their own citizens as being about risk management. And this is a term that you see all the time. Now, in the case of the big spy scandals that I've studied, where we've literally got, like we've seen reporting on the invoices of government departments hiring private intelligence to target people on the ground, they have been literally putting it on the general ledger as a security expense. And they justify the security expenditure as being risk management. So therefore, the targeting of citizens around the world who oppose some government policy or whatever government activity, we are being deemed a risk. We're being deemed a risk either to the government or to the police and security state or to corporate entities. And then these military inventions, these fusion centers, are trading in our data and pushing them up through the military networks. So the fusion centers, I should mention, although they started in Iraq and Afghanistan, they were propagated right across the domestic homelands of the Western world. So there are fusion centers right across the US, but there's also international fusion centers. So this is a military initiative that has been brought to the homeland, which is a total violation, obviously, of human rights and of countless historical principles. So then the domestic police intelligence units and the government departments and corporate entities, they don't like to do dirty work themselves. So what they do is they hire private intelligence and private security contractors. And those contractors are the ones that actually have teams of people that go and stalk and target and interfere with and sabotage and destroy the lives of whoever is deemed to be a risk to the state. They are literally billing the government. So the government's identifying who should be targeted, and then these are the goons that are going and doing it. Now, when you look at their websites and you read their promotional material, you discover that they openly brag about not just the fact that they work for corporations and work for domestic police intelligence units and work for government departments, but they also brag about having global customers. They have global customers that are foreign governments, and they have global customers that are commercial entities. So in New Zealand, if you piss off Saudi Arabia or some God knows who government overseas, that government can independently, or a company or a corporation in that country can independently engage these private intelligence and private security companies to come and fuck your life up, to put it nicely. So this is and then of course pushing it back the other way, up the waterfall, information that is gathered by these private security and private intelligence companies about you can be pushed back to their global customers, governmental or commercial, but also they try to pin you with anything they can, and then they report that back to your domestic police intelligence units, to your domestic government departments and corporate entities. And that's then again going up through the fusion centres. So the targeting directives are coming down the waterfall, and the instructions to these companies to target you. And then the information that they gather is going back up the waterfall, all the way back up into the global network.